All right, welcome back to the show. Today I've got my buddy Ian Bishop out of Hawaii, and I know a little bit about his background. I know he's an EOS coach, and we'll dive into that. I also know he's from the automotive industry, and I'm sure we'll dive into that in his story. But Ian, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, John. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm great, man. I'm great now that you're on. 6 hours behind us. You're just getting the day started, and we're starting to wrap up over here.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we were talking before we came on, like I'm just getting my kids out the door. You're about ready to go pick your kids up. Like, it's definitely tough syncing up with people being 3,000 miles out in the middle of the ocean.
Right. Not a bad life. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What are you doing now? And then definitely want to go back kind of where you started and everything too.
Yeah, for sure, man. So I run a company called Ops Academy. We work with COOs, operators, integrators, really kind of like supporting them and then also building out the operating system or the playbook for the business. So I got into it because, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but I came from automotive and I was always on the operations side, but everything in automotive is revenue focused. Like we look at gross profit, like 90% of employees are commission based off of gross profit in some way. And so when I started doing consulting and helping other businesses and they weren't paying attention to those numbers and they didn't have everything built around that, I was like, this seems like a big flaw. And I found EOS and it put a lot of language to what I had been doing operationally, but I found some flaws in it. And I actually was just having this conversation with a guy the other day. Have you seen the Savannah Bananas?
Yeah. Yep.
Baseball guys. So we went and saw them this summer and it was incredible. And I was telling somebody, I was like, the Savannah Bananas fixed everything that was wrong with baseball.
Yep.
Like all the areas where you're just like, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this doesn't make sense. They fixed it all, right? Yep. And I was talking to a guy a couple of days ago and I said, I'm the Savannah Bananas for EOS. Like I took all the things that EOS didn't do well and I inserted project management, sales cycles, selling cycles, marketing, and leadership development, which to me was like, those are the key areas that helped us grow our business. And the operations was just some of the framework that helped. But it's like, I think there's a lot of guys in the space that do operations for the sake of operations and not operations with revenue in mind. And so that's really kind of what makes us different is we build the custom operating system for the business. I've got a lot of clients that are in real estate and obviously like cookie cutter systems don't work for those guys because everybody's business is so different. Like in fact, I use you as an example a lot because, we met through the 50 and in there's a couple other guys that do self-storage, but they all do it completely different. And so there's guys that are doing conversion, guys doing new development. Like it is fascinating to me that you can have the same business, like same niche industry, whatever you want to call it, but it's like completely different business plan in terms of how you execute it. So to try to come in with like just a generic template and be like, all right, we're just going to overlay this on your business and it's going to work. It feels like a bad formula. So that's kind of what I do now. Yeah.
I know EOS is from the book Traction. If you guys haven't read it, make sure to read it. What is EOS in a nutshell? Obviously it's, around operating systems, but how can you describe it?
Yeah, it's basically, so EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating Systems. So basically a version that kind of spun off. All these operating systems spun off of Scaling Up. It's a book by Vern Harnish. But it's like a textbook. Like it's not a fun read. Yep. And EOS did a really good job of kind of like dumbing it down and making it really simple and digestible. Just like, here's where you start. Here's what you do next. And so, EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating Systems. The idea is like, you have to have some processes built in. You have to have a way that you measure data. You have to have a way that you solve issues. You got to have an org chart. You have to know where you're going. You have to have a vision, a mission, like these little things that come into the business. It's part of the reason I work with real estate investors so much, I think, is because a lot of real estate investors are really, really good at real estate investing, and they're still learning how to become great business owners. And so a framework like EOS or something like that is really helpful. But then what I found was EOS left a lot of guys like hungry for more or like fell short in a couple key areas. And so, it's essentially building out the operating systems for the business. I always use the example from Robert Kiyosaki, where it's like the difference between being self-employed in owning a business is that in owning a business, you own systems that run without you. And so if you don't show up, the business still makes money. Like that's like the simplest version is like, if your business does that, you own a business. If it doesn't, you are self-employed or you work for your business to some capacity. And so EOS or any kind of operating system is really trying to put in the foundations or the frameworks to be able to own the systems that work for you.
Yep. Well, and I'm glad you brought up that. I think us as real estate investors, we're kind of hooked by the financial freedom part, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's like we find some gurus or some educators in the space, and all they're teaching are finding deals, funding deals, right? They're not talking about, hey, guess what? After that, you got to create a business. Not even after, but now you've got a different looking business. You have to become a leader if you're not already. You need systems in place, processes in place. None of that stuff's talked about. And actually, it kind of, not that it dawned on me, but it really hit me probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago. And I did a show on that. No one talks about the operations in a business. And self-storage is, I don't know if it's more operations heavy. It can be more systems heavy than typical rental real estate. So from day one, I think storage kind of forces you to have those systems in place. And they're a little bit easier, but it's not talked about, and no one really talks about. It's not as sexy, but you can buy a really bad deal or a really good deal, and either have really bad operations or good operations, and it doesn't matter how you bought it. You can completely blow that deal up by having crappy operations, or vice versa. So I really wanted you on the show because of that, because it doesn't matter what kind of deal you buy, right? It matters about if you're hanging on to the deal, it matters about the life cycle of the deal.
Yeah, I think I always say like operations isn't a sexy sell, but it's what allows you to stack revenue on top. So I use the example like everybody's got a single story house, and pretty much everybody you talk to, they want a double or a triple, whether it's profit, gross profit, revenue, like whatever number that they're paying attention to, they want to double it or triple it. Like nobody's happy where they're at. So if you've got a single story house and you want to add a second or third story on top, the first thing we got to do is make sure the foundation can support it. And so that's how I view it, is like the operational work. Yeah, it's not sexy, but it's what's going to allow us to build the second and the third floor that everybody wants. So it's like, let's come in first, do the groundwork, and then we can add the other stuff on top. And so that's where, for me, like my background, it was so natural to focus on revenue, gross profit, because like those are the only numbers we paid attention to. So then operations just became like almost this necessary evil of just like, okay, what do we have to do in order to support more of this? Yeah. And so like a lot of guys in my space, there's kind of this split, I'd say, where it's like kind of a smoke and mirror, where guys either lead with like marketing and revenue language, and it's this bait and switch where they're like, yeah, we'll double your revenue, blah, blah, blah. And then once somebody's like, okay, great, sign me up. Or like, I want help. It's like, okay, cool. So now we're going to do all the operations work. And guys are like, whoa. So they don't talk about it at all in the beginning because it's not the sexy sell. And then there's the other guys on the other side of the spectrum who I feel like just do operations for the sake of operations, right? Like real easy to just be like, oh, I'm just wired this way. This is how I do it. Like this is going to help. But they like lose sight of the entrepreneur side of like growing the business and the why behind it all. And so I feel like I fit kind of in the middle there. And part of the reason it works so well with real estate investors is, like you said, real estate investors, a lot of times when I talk to them, they get into the business for the lifestyle. And as they start to grow the business, it starts to impede the lifestyle. And so they're very problem aware. Like they know this is an issue and they want to solve it. And then usually they can afford to solve it. And so part of the reason I created Ops Academy was actually inspired a lot by real estate investors, because they didn't want to learn how to do it. They were like, hey, I have this problem. I want to solve this problem, but I want somebody else to solve this problem. I don't want to learn how to run my meetings. I want to hire a guy that knows how to run the meetings. I don't want to come in and create the metrics and the scorecard and the P&L. I want to hire the guy that does all that, but I also don't know how to hold him accountable, and what should I even be asking him for, and how do I help him set that up? Because now we're getting into like the nitty gritty of what I do. Is like, there's a big difference between having a good operator and having a guy who can build your operating system. So it's like having the guy that builds the race car versus the guy that goes out and drives the race car and wins races. So your operator in your business is the race car driver, but has anybody ever built the race car for him? And have they built the best race car, or is he driving around in a go-kart and you're giving him the expectation of like, go out and win races? And the dude's going around the track in a little go-kart, right? Like Fred Flintstone with his feet. So there's a big difference in those. A lot of times guys hire an operator prematurely and they don't have any systems in place for them. So it would be like taking a guy, like I got a couple of buddies that they operate Chick-fil-A's, and great example because Chick-fil-A operator, everything's already built. The playbook, the menu, the marketing, the supply chain, like everything is already in place. All that's left for them to do is come in and run the playbook. Versus, great example, I had a guy years ago that worked for me that he used to work for Outback Steakhouse, and they have a completely different business model. So they send a guy to a new territory, and his job is to find the dirt, hire the GCs, build the store, hire a GM, train everybody, like get the permits, the signs, all this stuff, and then like hand it off to the GM that's going to run that location. So it's like if you took those two guys, the Outback Steakhouse guy and the Chick-fil-A guy, and you swapped them, it's like it'd be a cluster. Yep. And so a lot of times in business, we think operations, we just kind of lump it into one big basket. And we're like, oh yeah, that's my ops guy, or that's operations. But I would argue there's a big difference in like building the system versus running the system.
I like that. That's really good. You're really good with analogies, by the way. I was just thinking about that. It's like this guy's really
it's analogies. You gotta find. I'm a big patterns guy, so I always look for patterns, and I'm like, oh, this is just like this. Yep. It's part of the reason I love consulting, because it's like I see this work in this business, and I'm like, oh, that could also work over here, and that could also work over here. Well, why isn't this guy trying that? I love that crossover. And so the pattern recognition and like some of those analogies, it's like if the analogy can apply here, here, and here, it's like kind of like a testing almost of like, well, then this must be true.
Right. Yep. And I want to get into some more kind of specific questions, but let's, I know you're from the automotive industry. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, man. So, I don't know how far back you want to go. I grew up in the state of Washington in a double wide trailer, and blue collar parents that worked really hard and had really, really high expectations. Both were in the military. And so my sister and I were both valedictorians, got scholarships to college, but we're very much like the student in the system, right? Just like, I know how the system works. I know how to get an A, like not entrepreneurial, like none of that. I get into the car business, and I thought of it as just like, hey, this is how I'm gonna, basically it's like, this is how I'm gonna help pay for school, because nobody's gonna hire an 18-year-old kid to work full-time seasonally, right? In the summer when I'm on school break and in the winter when I'm on school break. So it's like, okay, I'll sell cars. I hate it. It's not a good look, but I definitely felt like I was better than that. It was like, I'm top of my class, going to school. I had offers at MIT, like I'm like baseball player, great student. I'm like, I should not be doing this. But it was like my second year. So the first year I kind of coasted, and in automotive, like when you're selling cars, let me back up. I washed cars. I worked in service, and I started selling cars once I was 18. And if you don't sell and make commission, you make minimum wage. Yeah. And so I remember being 18, 19 years old in the state of Washington and being stoked that minimum wage went up to $8.55. And I was like, boys, I just made an extra $70 this month. Like, so I did that the second year. I like, just being around it, it was kind of something that got caught, not taught. And I had an interaction where I had these people who were a little abrasive. They were a little rude, and they were no, until they were yes. And it just like blew my mind, because I was like, it felt like a mental chess match where I didn't threaten them. I didn't do anything illegal. I wasn't dishonest. It was just this like outwitted in terms of like negotiation, like sales, persuasion, influence, where I was just like, whoa, I'm 19 years old. These, like, to me, they felt like adults. No. And so I was like, I'm this kid talking to adults, and I just convinced them, influenced them, persuaded them to make a $35,000 purchase with nothing other than my words. And so that was for me kind of the moment where I caught the bug, and I was like, dang, it doesn't matter how old I am, how much experience I have. And it was so counter to everything I had learned like in school, which was very much like, you go through 101 to 201 to 202 to 3, like you just kind of keep climbing that ladder. And I was just like, I can just leapfrog all this. Like, this sounds way better. And so I just gotten married. A year later, my wife and I had our first son. Year after that, we had our second son. So now I'm a senior in college, married with 2 kids, selling cars seasonally. And I'm talking to my buddies, and I'm making more money selling cars like seasonally than they're making working part-time all year round.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, maybe this is actually kind of a good deal. Like, maybe I should keep this going. I had zero financial literacy. Like, this is the irony. I was a great student, knew nothing about money.
No.
Like, absolutely nothing. I'm talking to people about payments and down payments. I don't know how credit works. I don't know what APR means, right? Like, the irony is off the charts. But I do that. And then like around my senior year, I'm like, maybe this is the way to go. So I pivot I majored in business, and I pivoted my focus to finance. I went to like an automotive school after that to do finance, where you learn how to do like loans and sell products, insurance products. I got my insurance license, did all that, got into the automotive industry, and changed my life. It was the biggest blessing in terms of learning how I could control my own destiny, what skills actually moved the needle and mattered. And really from an entrepreneur standpoint, I got to be a part of growing some stores that I was able to ascend because of how well I did, but also like, because the automotive industry is pure meritocracy. And so like, there is no favoritism. There is no guessing. Like, this guy gets promoted. Like, there's no drama around it. Everybody knows why, because you can look back at his numbers for the last 6 months.
Yep.
Right. And so I loved that part of it. And I use this analogy that like, I think you build a business like a mountain, not a volcano. And what I mean by that is like, a mountain grows because the plates underneath start to shift, and it starts to push everything higher and higher from the bottom. And a volcano shoots stuff out, splatters on top, and it just keeps amassing the top layer. And so really I think there's some confusion sometimes when it's like, guys will even use the phrase with like an operator. They're like, I'm going to hire an operator, place him. Like, I just bought a business. I hired an operator. He's just going to run it. And I think people do that to the extreme that they think you're just going to keep doing that rather than developing the people in the business. Mm-hmm. And so automotive's incredible for that, because most guys that come to sell cars come and sell cars out of desperation, not inspiration. And so when we talk about like A players and how do you attract A talent, I had a buddy one time, he runs a sales training company, and he was telling me how when he hires, they pay him, I think it was like $2,500, because they get access to all of the training and academy and all this stuff that he's already created. And so they pay him to get hired and join the team. And I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I can barely get a guy to come and work for me, like giving a signing bonus, and they're paying you? Like, what is going on here? And so it took us a few years, but I think honestly, this was probably the thing that led to the most success that we had in automotive. Because I ran a dealership out here in Maui with my brother-in-law. And I think that the thing that we really cracked was the leadership development, the personal development side of things. And so we started meeting people where they were at instead of getting frustrated that we weren't attracting A players. And so, I mean, we can go to some of the tactics that we did for that, but that was really the thing that started to set us apart, was like the personal development, the leadership development. And that's what allowed us to build the business like a mountain and develop the people to the point that like we opened a second location because we had so many good people that we were like, dude, if we don't open a second location, we're going to lose some of these people that we've developed. Right? Like it put the pressure on us to turn around and grow the business. rather than us growing the business and having like this void, which is I think the state a lot of people are in right now, is they have like a gap. A lot of times like an hourglass. They're really heavy at the top, like executive leadership team, and they're really heavy at the bottom, like entry level, laborers, technicians, whatever. But it's like, I think there's a epidemic of a lack of leadership and management in a lot of industries, to where people don't know how to develop them. It's not being taught. It's not being taught in college. It's not being taught in school. It's not really leaned into that much in the entrepreneurial world. It's very like selfish focused. It's like, but how do I actually grow the people around me? How do I develop leaders and train them up? And so again, like that, it was a big focus in creating Ops Academy, was how do we do leadership development in a way that we're building up the people in the business to give our clients an unfair advantage when it comes to hiring and developing people, to where it's not just this like revolving door. So I did that for, I was in automotive, I think for a total of 15 years. And the crazy part, so I have an executive coach, and I tell him little stories and things. And he told me I should write a book on this, because every week there is something that comes up that is, and I told you I'm a big patterns guy, that is exactly like automotive. Like I was talking to a friend of ours who does assisted living, and he was telling me how they do, like how they get placements from placement agencies. And like some are better than others in terms of like hospice care versus, you might have a resident that's a little easier to care for. And so you could potentially kind of like bundle them up as they're being like transacted, I guess, from these placement agencies. And I'm like, this is exactly how you bundle contracts in automotive. Is you meet with the bank and you're like, you call them Monday morning. You're like, hey, I got this one. It's awesome. I got this good one. It's awesome. You kind of like butter them up a little bit. And you're like, okay. And then I got this one, which I'm going to need a favor on. But like, dude, I already gave you all these other good ones. Like, let's just make this happen. It's like, it's the exact same conversation in terms of like bundling. And so like once a week, this comes up where it's something that I learned in automotive that applies in some other industry. And the irony was like, I didn't start doing consulting for a long time because I felt like the only thing I knew was automotive. I was like, what's a guy that sells cars know about helping? One of my first clients was like, had like a Shopify store, and I had a marketing agency, and I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to help you. And then I look at his stuff and I'm like, oh, there's like basics in here that you're not doing. And it really started to open my mind to like, maybe I do know more than I thought. And yeah, man, every week there's something from automotive that carries over that.
Well, and it's, I'm not arguing that. Well, first of all, awesome story. I want to keep talking about that. I'm not arguing with that, but I think too, so I come from working for a small electrical contractor for over a decade, and I did everything besides pay the bills, right? Like small company. So I wore so many hats, and a lot of the things, just like what you said, I don't know if it's really dawned on me all that much, but it's like a lot of things that I learned what to do and not to do transfers over into running a successful business that you don't really realize you're going through it at the time, but then you can relate it to, whatever you go into next, and a kind of segue into sales. I think sales gets a bad rap, but I think sales maybe, who was I talking to the other day? Oh, I went on a vacation with some buddies last week. It was kind of a vacation mastermind thing. And we were talking about sales. I was like, everyone here's a salesman. I was like, you're selling at some point. If you're buying a real estate, if you're buying property, you're selling yourself to somebody, whether it's the agent you're buying from or the seller you're buying from or a lender or private money, you're selling at some point. Talk about how, I guess, your sales training was and how important it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got influenced early on. Somebody gave me some tapes by Zig Ziglar. Yeah. Zig is old school sales trainer, and then Jim Rohn. And so I was heavily influenced by those two guys, and it just framed my entire like belief around sales. And then being automotive, we were big Grant Cardone guys. Yeah. Like we drank the Kool-Aid. We were all in Grant Cardone.
That was how long ago?
This would have been like I probably got exposed to Grant in 2009, 2010.
Yeah, so way before he blew up.
Yeah, basically when he was like only automotive.
Yeah.
And then he started branching out and talking about a little more, like 10X rule came out, and then he kind of started to blow up a little bit. But yeah, so that was huge in terms of like how we implemented it. Guys come to us, desperation, not inspiration. And so our first, and again, keep in mind, like this took years to develop and figure out. But we would start it in the hiring process. So on the application, we'd have our core values. Hey, this is what we're about. This is what we're trying to do. And the theory was that like, hey, from day zero, you're going to know what we're about so that you're not surprised by it. And then one of the key questions we started asking. So in the beginning, we were trying to figure out, again, pattern, trying to figure out why some guys worked out and why some guys didn't. And age started to look like maybe it was a thing. And it was really a red herring where it wasn't age as much as it was whether somebody was a learner or not. So we'd have like really young guys who just like, think they know everything. And then we'd have some of the like older, like can't teach an old dog new tricks. And so what we realized is like, okay, it's not age, it's whether this person's a learner or not. And so what we started doing was in our interviews on the application, we asked, what books have you read so far this year? And then in the interview, we would say, hey, what was like biggest takeaway from this book that you read? And it wasn't even so much what book they read. I mean, sometimes you'd see some titles and you're like, all right, this guy's about it. But it was more so, are they reading anything? Yep. Right? Are they doing anything with that? Did it impact them? Right? Are they just saying what I want to hear? And when we started doing that and honing in on the fact that like we're looking for learners because we started to develop the curriculum to train people and develop them. And so it's like, if I can find a learner, they're going to buy into what I'm selling. And so that was probably like the biggest shift, was like all the work that went in before somebody even started. And then once they started, I mean, automotive has so much downtime that it's like, how do we make good use of this? And so, I mean, at our peak, we would have sales meetings in the morning, sales meeting after lunch. We'd have training, role play, like there's no ego in getting better, right? And so for me, I always looked for two things. It was like, I want to know that somebody's willing to be honest, because that means they're going to give me good feedback. And I want to know that they're going to follow through, that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, right? And there's a little bit of like obedience almost in that, or just like trust is kind of the byproduct. But it really comes down to that like follow through. And I felt like if somebody was willing to be honest and follow through, that I could develop them into whoever they want it to be. And so, I mean, we had guys that, I mean, to paint the picture, like automotive attracts more trauma, I think, per square capita than any other place other than like maybe a prison. And keep in mind, like I had guys that were coming to work with an anklet on. Yeah. I had guys that have been in and out of prison. I had guys who had infant children pass away, broken homes, guys sleeping in their car, guys walking to work, like you name it. And we had an instance, this is where I got this from, was we had two guys that underperformed. One guy got let go and the other guy didn't. And one of our senior leaders asked me, he said, how come this guy got let go and this guy didn't? Their results were the same. This is where I differ a little bit. I think I care more about your intention than I do your result. Now, obviously, like at a management level, like we got to look at results, but at a senior leader level, like I'm looking at what's their intention, right? And it really came down to this idea of like trust, like the follow through side and the honesty. Because with these two guys, one guy, I could ask him, I say, hey, how are things going? What do you need help with? Be like, oh, everything's great, boss. Thumbs up. I'm like, okay. Hey, like I noticed you haven't been making as many calls. I think you're really great when you're in front of somebody. Why don't you do this? Why don't you get in front of 10 people today? Or no, it was less than that. I think it was like 5. It's like get in front of like 5 people today and let's throttle back the number of calls that you're making. And let's just get you some wins. But I want you to kind of balance that out by getting in front of some people face to face. Okay, great. Sounds great. End of the day. Hey man, how many people did you get in front of? Oh, well, how many calls did you make? Oh, well, it's like, well, we had a conversation about this and you agreed that you would get in front of these people, that you would make at least this many calls, right? I asked you what you needed help with. You told me nothing. Like, there's just nothing for me to work with there, right? And I still believe this, and it might be to the deficit that just I'm not that good of a leader yet. But I was just like, man, if you're not going to be honest with me and you're not going to do what you say you're going to do, like I got 18 other guys that I'm trying to manage and help with this. Like, I just need those as like a bare minimum from you. And so the other guy that didn't get let go, same exact conversation. Hey man, what do you need help with? Oh boy, I got this guy. He won't call me back. And I got this going on. And let me tell you about my home life. And like, okay, cool. Like, let's put some guardrails on there, a little bit of boundaries. But now I've got something to work with. Like, now I can point you in a direction, right? It's like, okay, here's what I need you to do. Just do this, do this, do this. End of the day, hey man, did you get that done? Yeah, but didn't go well. Yeah, but no result. Cool, but you did it? Yeah. Awesome. This comes back to a bigger theory that I think is like, we have to get our teams to execute. That way, if they don't get the result that we're after, but they executed 100% what we asked them to do, that's our fault, not their fault. And so I need you to execute, but I'm not going to hold you completely accountable to the result if it's my strategy. And so if you don't get the result, I'm going to go, awesome. Let's go back to the drawing board and let's adapt the strategy. Now go out and execute again and let's see if it gets better. So like this guy, for example, doesn't get the result. I'm like, awesome. Here's what I want you to do. The next 10 calls you make, I want you to make them in front of this senior leader on our team, assistant manager. I want you to sit across from him so he can listen to everything that you're saying. And I knew that he was one of the best trainers we had. It's like, he's going to have some critiques for you. He's going to tell me and he's going to tell you what you need to change. Do whatever he says. Okay. Guy does it. Assistant manager has some critiques. He fixes it. Completely turns his career around. It's like, to me, it was all based on the fact that this guy was willing to be honest and to follow through, to do what he said he was going to do and to give honest feedback, even if it wasn't great, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear, right? Because it gave me something to work with. So now I can come back to that strategy and I can start to adapt that and go, okay, let's pivot this. Let's pivot this. And I think that's what a lot of people want at the end of the day. They want a team that's just going to go out and execute. Like, that's half of the peace of mind, is like, just do what I asked you to do, please. So
this is all awesome stuff, man. It's so awesome. It sounds like, and I'm a big pattern guy too. You keep saying patterns. I'm like, I'm a huge pattern guy. I probably look for them too often. But it sounds like you're looking for two key attributes are being a learner and being honest. Everything else you can kind of work with. Is that right?
Yeah. And the follow through. I need some of the follow through too. Like, I need people that are going to do what they say they're going to do. The counter is like, people that have excuses, that have a scapegoat. Well, this guy didn't get me this. Right. So there's definitely a level of like accountability that comes into like executing.
Yeah. So back to, I guess, your story. We're jumping all over the place, which is good. This is awesome stuff, man. So obviously you were selling cars, you moved up the rank. How did you make the transition to basically do your own thing and start some coaching?
Yeah. So I had a small marketing company and started getting some people asking me for help with marketing. And honestly, it was because we're on Maui. It's not a big island. And so if you're even halfway decent at marketing, everybody sees your stuff, right? Like, there's only, I think back in the day, it was like, there was only 140,000 Facebook users. And so I could target all 140,000 people for, $60 and have everybody see my stuff every single day, And so when people found out that I was behind that, I started getting people asking me for help with marketing, and definitely some imposter syndrome where I was like, well, I don't know your business. I don't know your industry. Like, I don't know that I can help you with marketing. But I was always really interested and really curious about marketing, mainly because of the leverage it created. And so there was a huge shift in my career where when I was still selling, even when I was selling in finance, you're still one-to-one in terms of your impact. Now, it's a high one-to-one. Like, I had the potential to, even as a sales manager, like you could double the gross profit of one single transaction, but you can only be in one transaction at a time. And so we started opening symbiotic businesses. So we have rental car company, aftermarket company, Line-X franchise, like multiple new car franchises, used cars. Like we're doing a ton of stuff. I can only have so much impact one-to-one. And so it was like, how do I create the leverage and that duplicity? Marketing to me was the answer. It was like, okay, well, if I can create a 10% boost, a 20% boost by learning how to do this well, and I can do it across all of our businesses, that's going to have a bigger impact than even whatever the greatest impact I can do one-to-one in a transaction is. So marketing was always interesting.
Really quick, I don't want you to lose your train of thought, but I want to pause you. Just hit me. You started thinking this way once you got out of 1, sales, and 2, daily operations, right? You've kind of hired people below you to where you can focus on the business.
It was kind of at the same time because
okay,
I couldn't move on to the next thing until I brought those people in. Yep. Like I had to replace myself. And I think this is probably what made me a little bit different is I looked at it like, if I can replace myself, I can move on to the next thing.
Yep.
Right? Like the mountain. If I can find the guy or guys to do this role, I can move on to the next role. And I think a lot of people in, corporate or whatever don't approach it that way. That's like a threat to their job security.
Yep.
Well, if I teach you how to do this, then why do they need me?
Nope.
So I actually use this. I learned this phrase the other day. It's anything that only you can do is a black box. And so in the business, we want no black boxes. People should be cross-trained. You should be educating other people how to do your position so that you can move on to the next thing to increase revenue. So I actually have like a calendar management tool I use that does this exactly. But it was kind of happening at the same time. It was like, okay, if I'm freeing myself up from this to move on to the next thing, what is that next thing? Like what's going to have a bigger impact than this? So they were kind of in conjunction.
It's cool. Yeah, sorry, I forget where you left off.
So I'm doing the marketing.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that. I get people start asking me for help. And it was kind of just because everybody was seeing our stuff at the dealership and they found out that I was behind it. And so it was like just the results impact, I guess, like that visibility. And so the same situation happened every time. I would come in, have a meeting with somebody to look at their marketing. And 20 minutes in, I would go, you don't need help with marketing. You need help with your sales process. You need help with your follow-up. You need help with your scripts, your closing. Like some component of their sales process was broken and they thought they just needed more marketing. And so this happened, I don't know, 5, 6 times, same way every time. Somebody would say, hey, can you help me with my marketing? 30 minutes into our conversation, like, dude, I don't think you need help with marketing. I think you need help with this. I think you need help with this. And they would say, well, can you help me with that? And I would go, that's actually the thing I'm better at. Yeah, I can help you with that. Like I came from a sales industry. Like it wasn't like I learned how to do sales. It was like we were sales, right? It's like I was born in the dark. Like this is it. This is all I know. Yeah. And so I started doing consulting via marketing like inquiries. I started doing consulting that was very sales heavy. And like that pattern still happens to this day sometimes where guys will go, oh, can you take a look at my marketing? And it's like, yeah, dude, you don't need help with marketing. Like that's not your issue. If I gave you 1,000 leads right now, like I don't think you'd close any of them. And so that was kind of how I started transitioning into consulting. And then exited the automotive business and went full on into consulting and started having a little bit of success with that, but really started identifying some of the like common challenges or needs around operations, operators in particular. I think there's I mentioned already, I think there's a massive like void in the market in terms of leaders and managers. But I think a lot of it is like, if you look at a C-suite, your CEO, like to me, that's the guy that's just like, he's born to be the CEO. Like there's just something in them where they're just wired that way to an extent, I think. Like the really high level CEO executives. Your CFO, very clear trajectory on how they get there. They go to school, become a CPA, ascend, they get a CFO role, bigger and bigger companies, they work their way up. I think if an 18-year-old kid said to his guidance counselor, I want to become a COO, they would have no idea what path to set him on.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's like, just get out there and do stuff or get more experience. And so that just seems like a bad plan. I was fortunate to get a lot of experience, to get a lot of reps. I had a friend back in the day that was thinking about becoming a real estate agent. And I told him, I said, if you sold cars for 3 years and then left and became a real estate agent for the next 2 years, 5 years from now, I think you'd be way better off than if you just started in real estate today. This is for like a retail agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like you're going to get so many more reps selling cars in a similar transaction, big dollar amounts, similar like model framework. You're going to start to build a bigger book of business and clientele. If you treat people the right way, they'll follow you when you go from automotive into real estate. And so Ops Academy was really designed around how do we accelerate the learning curve of the operator? Because a lot of guys, whether it's a mistake or not, they hire somebody that they really know, like, and trust, childhood friend, an in-law, somebody they grew up with, whatever. And they really trust that person. And that's really the big thing they're trying to satisfy is like, I need somebody that I can trust in this endeavor. But that person either doesn't have the business acumen or like the specific knowledge of your industry. And so they're playing catch up. And on top of that, most guys throw them in to a go-kart and they haven't built a race car for them and they expect them to go out and win races. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, they're not incentivized to learn as quickly as you were. As the business owner, you get to keep what you kill, right? For them as the operator, it's like, well, I don't have that same incentive. And so right away, their learning curve is going to be slower based off of incentive. They're typically wired a little bit different. And so they're going to be a little slower, a little more methodical, a little more systemized. And so that's going to slow them down as well. So then the business owner looks at this and they go, I might as well just do this myself. It's going too slow. Still requires a lot of me. People are still coming to me for the answers. And it's because they never built the system. They never built the race car. And they've put somebody in place and they've almost like kind of set them up for failure. And they trust this person, but the person doesn't know how to get results because they don't know the business. They don't know the industry. So all these things kind of compound. And so Ops Academy was kind of born out of solving that problem, going, how do we accelerate the learning curve of the operator? How do we build the race car for them? Right? Because I still need some involvement. Like I got to know, hey, how far back do I put the seat? Can you reach the pedals? Do you know what all these buttons do? Right? So there still has to be a little bit of involvement because there's also the phrase that like people support that which they help to create. And so if you get your operator involved in building the playbook, then they feel like it's theirs. Then they're going to follow through on it. Right? Versus if I just come in and build it and just like hand it off, like it's like a coach and a quarterback. Right? He's going to pull the quarterback in. He's going to be like, here's what I'm thinking. These are the schemes I think are going to work well. This is where I see you really flourish. Right? These are your strengths. So let's do some stuff like this. Just trust me on it. Right? There's like some of that back and forth dialogue. It's kind of the same idea, same thing we're trying to create.
It's awesome. It's awesome, man. As much as I'd like to talk about this all day, because I love this stuff. I mean, I love finding real estate deals, but I love this stuff, finding problems and solutions to them. But we're sort of coming up on time here. So I did want to ask, what's like the top 3 issues that you find with businesses once you kind of dive into them? Are there 3 common things that you find?
I mean, in the business or with the business owner?
Whatever you want to do, whatever you want to answer.
I mean, a lot of times it's the fact that you haven't built the playbook. You haven't built the race car.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I only work with companies that have an operator in place already. And so they've got the operator, but they don't have the playbook. They don't have the race car. I would say that's probably a big one. A lot of times there's like a information and decision-making bottleneck with the business owner. Everything lives in their head, and they're frustrated that people keep coming to them for the answers, but they're the only place where the information exists.
Yeah.
So there's usually a process we have to go through to kind of decentralize that information and to put the guardrails in place in terms of decision making. So the idea would be like I just had this happen last week with a client. His operator is getting like 3 quotes. We're kind of doing a 1-3-1 type of deal. His operator is getting 3 quotes, and we created a deadline to make a decision on those by this date next week. Well, we can proactively go through that. So we can say, hey, if this quote comes back like this, and this quote comes back like this, which one would we go through? Which one would we go with? And so we can walk through that, which is going to teach the operator, here's how I would think about making that decision. And so if we can decentralize the information and decision-making away from the business owner, now their team starts to make decisions like them, don't have to come to them for all the answers. And that usually alleviates a lot of the stress and even just the time where the business owner feels like they're just like tied up running day-to-day stuff in the business. And then there's resentment because they're like, what did I hire you for if I'm still having to do all this and I'm still having to answer all these questions?
Yep.
So that's another one. I don't know. Another theme I see a lot is like guys want more for less. So everybody wants a double or a triple, but they don't want to keep putting in as much effort. They're like, yeah, I want a double, but I want to do it with half as much time in the business. Yep. And it's like, well, that's not how equations work. Like we got to figure out a different input if that's what we want. And usually that conversation kicks off with like, are you overextended and you're just trying to get back to neutral? Or are we at neutral and we're just trying to become more efficient? Because if you're overextended and we're just trying to get back to neutral, like just by definition, there's not going to be any ROI. Like this is going to be a pure expense, right? But we have to know where we're starting from, to be fair. And so usually the conversation kicks off like that. It's like, if you're overextended and we're just trying to get to neutral, but like, don't expect any ROI, but let's set the foundation so that once we get to neutral, we have the momentum to keep growing without ever requiring you to go past neutral. Again, it's like that guardrails kind of idea. Yep. I don't know. I would say those are probably the most common things that I encounter. But honestly, the process is like everybody's a little different. So it's kind of a doctoring. Like usually the first 30 days, it's like the marketing example. It's like, okay, yeah, well, let's do all this stuff with your marketing. Like I had a big client one time, had a whole like 90-day plan. Here's what we're going to do, and the marketing and all these funnels and all this stuff. Dude, 30 days in, same conversation happens. I'm like, yeah, I think your sales team needs help. Like, I didn't realize it was like this. They're like, okay, well, can we put a pause on that? And can you help the sales team? Again, yeah, that's the thing I do better. And it was like, okay. Like all that got thrown out the window. Yeah. And then I worked with them for almost a year, purely just on the sales side. And we barely touched on marketing. I mean, there's some, and this is one of the things that I was lucky to have the experience in, was like, I've been a fractional CRO for a while. CRO is like your chief revenue officer. And the idea is that like your revenue officer has the autonomy over sales and marketing. And so you can create like the full spectrum and make sure that like the whole process is actually working. Whereas in most businesses, we silo marketing and then a handoff, and then we silo sales. And I think if you have your marketing focused on the end in mind of a sale, that's a lot different than going like the end in mind is just a lead that we're handing off to the sales department, because then it's a bad lead. And usually what happens is sales and marketing do this. They're like, oh, well, the leads suck. Like, oh, well, we're giving them so many leads, they just need to close them. Right. And it's like, they're not working together. Yep. And so that's where I see like that autonomy comes into place, where you need somebody that can oversee your sales and marketing. If you're separating the two, I think nowadays that's a failing formula.
This is awesome, man. This is awesome. Again, I could talk all day about this stuff, and I've learned a ton this episode. Have the last few questions here. But before I forget, I guess I'm going to ask you how people can find you, but if people are looking, I guess, what are they looking for when they reach out to you, right? Some type of issue with sales, marketing, they think, obviously, and then it turns into something else. But typically, what are people looking for when they reach out to you?
Yeah, I work with people that have a runaway train. So somebody who has momentum and they need somebody to come in and kind of corral it.
Yeah.
So I'm like the rudder on a speedboat. It's like, you've got momentum and you're like, this is working, but holy cow, it's out of control.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, I'm the other puzzle piece that brings order to chaos, puts the guardrails in place, and helps kind of like keep and hold that direction. I'm not the startup guy. I'm not the guy where it's like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. You know, could you help us launch it?
Yeah.
I'm like, that sounds exhausting and terrible to me. I don't want to be any part of that. But if you're at like an 8 or a 7 and you want to go to a 10, like, that's my sweet spot. Or you're at a 9 and you want to go to 10, like, that's really gets me excited. No. But if you're at like a 2 or a 3, or you have a concept or an idea, like, yeah, not me, man. Like, couldn't be further from what I do. So most people are coming to me where they're like, I have momentum, and it's usually because I talk to the business owner. I'm not talking to their operator. Like, I work with operators, but it's usually via the business owner. Yep. And so the problem people come to me with is that they're overextended. They want more out of their business without more from them. They're usually the bottleneck of information and decision making. And they want their business to grow on autopilot, but they don't own any of those systems. And so they're essentially self-employed in their own business. Yeah. And there's usually some benchmarks. You know, you got to have 5, 6, 7 employees. Like, you have to be past the point where you see employees as an expense. You have to have employees that are helping you generate revenue. That's where we're going to start to tap into scale with systems. So I would say that's probably like, it's kind of a vague answer, but no, I work in a lot of different industries, and that's usually kind of like the common theme amongst them.
Yep. No, that's helpful. That makes sense. So last 3 questions here. What are you better at than everybody else? And you can't answer analogies, even though you gave us about 30.
Ooh, what am I better at than everyone else? I can walk into any room, and whether it's a room, a business, I can find a way to make it better. I would call, I don't know if this is a real term. I would call myself a improvement or like refinement specialist. I think there's nobody better on the planet than I am at making things better. And that's why I like helping somebody go from a 9 to a 10, not a 2 to a 7. So I'm like, that sounds boring to me. A lot of people could do that. Yeah. The 9 to a 10, the 9.9 to a 10. I don't think there's anybody else that can come in and do that. My wife and I had this realization years ago where it's like, have you ever heard of the Enneagram? Mm-mm. It's like a personality test type of deal. And one of the ways to identify like which one you fall into was there was a phrase, and it said, this type of person walks into a room and sees where everything is and where everything should be. And it blew my mind, because I was like, are you telling me there's people that don't do that? Because that's how I operate. I'm like, this is out of place. This is out of place. This is out of place. This could be better. This could be better. And so, yeah, I do that. That's essentially what I do when I walk into somebody's business. I'm like, here's all the things that are wrong. Here's all the things that we could fix. I need some feedback on which ones are, because I don't know your business as well as you do. So you got to tell me which ones are going to move the needle the most. I can help identify them, right? Sometimes you can't see the forest through the trees. I can find them, and I can find the solution, and I can build it, and then we can hand it off to your operator. But which ones are actually going to move the needle the most? So I actually just did this with a client where when they bring up issues on a weekly basis, so we do this as part of their weekly meeting. And when we're solving issues in the business, we categorize it by dollars in impact or dollars that it's costing the company. Like, best guess, this problem that we're having is costing us this much. And part of it was based out of the fact that, like, there were some people in the business that had $500 problems, and there were other people in the business that had $5 million problems. But the $500 problem person might have been a little louder. And so their issue got addressed. And we're like, whoa. We can have way bigger impact if we actually know like what this is costing us. So to answer your question, I think I am a refinement improvement specialist, and that I can find a way to make anything better.
I've it's one really good answer. We definitely haven't had that answer yet. but I can definitely attest to that because I've seen.
Because I'm the only one.
What's that?
That's why I said it's because I'm the only one. That's why you've never had that answer before.
That's true. You're the only one, and you're the best, and we've got you here on the show. But yeah, I've definitely seen that over the. You're obviously part of the 50, and you're part of the behind the scenes, and have definitely seen you implement some strategies. So have definitely seen that. What's next for you?
Oh, I am living in a season right now where what's next is not forever. And I have been, just in automotive, I was in a career where I was like, this is forever.
Yeah.
And so for me coming out of that over the last couple of years, I've been going like, still having that same thought process of like, well, whatever I commit to is forever. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to unwire that a little bit to go like, what's next is not forever.
That's really good.
So my wife and I, we just spent the summer in Nashville just because we could. We wanted to go check it out and explore it. And it was like, all right, that's cool. People are like, oh, are you moving there? I'm like, no. It was just something we wanted to try, and that's what was next at that point. What's next for me right now? Man, I'm a big believer in integration. I'm a part of a mastermind group that talks about integration over balance. And so what does it look to live an integrated life where you're the same person Wednesday afternoon as you are Friday night, as you are Sunday morning? And what does it look like to have your kids be able to listen in on your business phone calls, conversations, right? Would you say something that you'd be embarrassed to say in front of them? And so for me, I'm really trying to step into like, what does that look like to have an integrated life with my kids, with my family, with my work? And honestly, like one of the big things that's come up recently is, and we're going to pivot hard here. One of the big things that's come up recently is like, I think the biggest ROI investment that I could make, like multi-generationally in my family, is in my 4 sons. If I can get them, and not that I need them to go into business or work for me or anything like that, but if I can get them to solve problems and create revenue at the level that I do, there's 4 of them. Like that's going to have a way bigger impact than any investment, business, real estate that I could do by myself. And so, my oldest son is about to be 13. So I still have a lot of years to figure this out. Maybe not a lot, but I've got a few years to figure it out. But that's really kind of the what's next, is going like, gosh, how do I give these kids a competitive advantage and train them up in a way that's going to have a way bigger impact than anything I could do by myself. Yeah. And I kind of believe that same thing in business, where I'm like, man, how do I come alongside other guys that are doing big things in their industries and be a trusted advisor enough to be able to help them increase that impact, work with their operator, their COO, their CRO, whoever it is, or step into some of those roles fractionally, like, if it's for a season or if it's permanent, whatever. Like, I think that's what I'm looking for is some of those impacts to be able to go, all right, how do I use my gifts and what I'm really, really good at, kind of keep my eye on the ball, and stay focused on that to have the biggest impact I can based on the gifts that I've got.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Well, we have a few minutes left. But I want to ask what you do. How do you, so my son, I can talk about either kid, daughter or son, but my son just had a soccer tournament this past weekend. And he's playing baseball and soccer right now. So he's sharing those. He's back and forth, and he's only 7, right? But he's had some lumps in baseball, and we've been out in the yard, hitting, throwing more. And obviously he's gotten better. And I think he's seen that improvement. Soccer, he's on a travel team, and it's the premier team. So it's the highest team in this club. Like, I'm his dad, but hands down, he's the least skilled on the team. And the championship game he played, him and 2 other boys played by far the least amount in the game. As a parent, it's tough because it's like, dude, we got to go to work now. Like, we got to go get better. right? We got to go train. You need to work on skills. But then I'm like, I got to pump the brakes a little bit. And he needs to figure this out on his own. And I can't be there to hold his hand. So how do you kind of balance that between hand holding and actually like, okay, I can jump in here and provide my input?
Man, we need 3 more hours.
I know we do.
So I coach baseball. So I feel like I've had a lot of exposure to this. And man, there's a lot of ways to answer this question. I think
you got 37 seconds.
I have a buddy who is a sports psychologist that works with professional teams, and he wrote like a little pamphlet, like ebook, and he sent it to me. And I think it was on the cover. There's a quote that says, like, there's no other arena other than youth sports that pulls your heart out of its chest and exposes it in the middle of the field. And I think having your kids play sports, especially if you are a competitive person, if you were an athlete, like, there is no bigger challenge, sorrow, emotional roller coaster than that, because you can't do it for them. And for me, I have a hard time. I have a big helpless trigger. And so for me, it's that helplessness where it's like, I can't do it for you. And same thing with, like, you mentioned like putting in the work. It's like, I can't do the work for you. I can't make you want it. I think in the beginning, there's certain sports, like with baseball, for a 7-year-old is way too complicated. Like, there are so many rules and skills and all this stuff. I'm a big proponent of just like raise athletes and then start to like build in the like refined skills later. Cause I think you'll do more damage than good putting them into sports at an early age. Cause how old's your son?
7.
Yeah, dude. It's like, I heard a guy one time, he said, like, till your son goes through puberty, we have no idea how good he's going to be.
Yeah.
He could end up being 5'2". Like,
right. Well, and you see that a lot too, right? Like, a lot of these kids, and I'm comparing to kind of growing up, like a lot of the kids that were really good from kindergarten to 8th grade were not the same kids that were good from 9th grade to 12th grade, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's man, there's a lot that goes into it. But one of the things that I always think is funny is, like, especially with entrepreneurs, business owners, real estate guys, is we're so big on time freedom. And then all of a sudden we look at our kids' sports schedule and it's like, well, hold on. Yeah. It's just like, it's the biggest like slap in the face where it's like, well, wait a minute here. This isn't what I have worked my entire life to try to set all this up for. And so I don't know. I actually kind of push back on some of that. Like, we don't do, so like my son plays baseball. We commit at the beginning of the year, the end date of, like, we're not doing all-stars. If there's a tournament before this date, sure. If there's a tournament after, like, we're out. We're going to do summer as a family. We're not going to do summer travel baseball as a family. And that's been helpful. I mean, I don't know that my son would make it, but so I don't know that's really an issue that we have to tackle, but just having that commitment of just like, this is the stop date. And because otherwise it's so easy for it to just bleed over to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Yeah, I don't know, man. I've made a lot of mistakes on that front in terms of sports and trying to force my kids to do it. Now I try to take a more long-term approach where I'm like, man, I want you to learn how to surf, how to golf, how to play pickleball, because we can do those things together for the rest of our lives. And we can take surf trips. We can take golf trips. Like, we can do this forever. And so, like, who cares if you're the starting quarterback in high school? Like, that is not going to, that's not going to be the thing that you're going to hang your hat on. If anything, it might do more damage because then you're that guy that's like the hometown hero and that's all you talk about. Yeah. And so we try to take a little bit more long-term approach to it now. I don't know. My kids are still young. We'll see how it plays out. I've kind of got two like sets. So my older boys are 11 and 12, about to be 13. And then my younger two are 3 and 5. So I kind of have like these two pairs. And so I always say, like, all right, I made all the mistakes with the older pair. So now on the younger pair, like, going to be dialed. I'm going to have it figured out.
Yeah.
And I already told my wife, I'm like, they're not playing sports. Like, I don't even know if they're going to school, right? Like, I don't know if they're going to school. I don't know if they're playing sports. Like, we might give it till they're like 10 before we try any of that kind of stuff out. Just because it's just like, man, I don't see the benefit. And it just feels like it's weighing down on us to keep up with the schedule and the family. Like, so
I'm glad you said that, because I the whole, like, this weekend was, I don't want to say it was a wreck. It was like a lot of ups and downs, but it's like looking at the schedule, and like soccer owns our life till next like April or something.
yeah.
But basketball season's
it's
coming
like you
up.
got a W-2.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Owns your life.
After like 4 p.m. W-2.
Yeah, dude. You got that second job.
So I do, and this is gonna keep going. You still have time, right?
Yeah, I'm good, man.
Okay.
You're the one that's got to pick your kids up from school.
Well, they don't have school today, but I do have, we'll call it 10-ish minutes, and I got to roll. So I was thinking about this, and you brought it up, where we don't really know if sports is a good thing or a detriment to our kids, right? Or to any of us. What about this? And I'm still trying to chew through this. Is being competitive really an advantage when you get out in the real world? Now, obviously, if you're at a W-2, yeah, you're probably trying to climb and you're trying to beat out the other person, but you're really competing against yourself. And you're just, and maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe you're just trying to be the best person you can be at whatever you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if being competitive does more harm than good, because at times I'm like, I'm being way too competitive right now. And it's not necessarily towards business, but maybe it's towards friendship or whatever else. So I guess, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So what if you swapped out the word competitive with intensity? Because I feel like, and sometimes this causes issues around my household, where I have a level of intensity sometimes that isn't matched by my sons or my wife. Yeah. And I don't see it as a bad thing. I'm like, we're going places. We're going to get this done. Like, we're doing stuff. Like, it's just a level of intensity. It's not like I'm competing against them, trying to tear them down, anything like that. I'm just like, there's an intensity that we're going to move through the world with, right? Yeah. Like, with purpose. I did some work with a guy in Tennessee. His name's Coach Michael Burt. He's a little bald-headed dude with a Southern accent. Great guy. And he uses this phrase he calls prey drive. And so, like, your prey drive is your instinct to pursue. And there's different ways to activate it. Animals have it naturally. As humans, like, because of our conscious mind, we seek comfort. And so we actually lose a lot of prey drive. And one of the things he talks about is, like, how do you activate it? So you have to consciously go through steps to activate that prey drive, that instinct to pursue, which is different than motivation. And one of the things he talks about is, like, competition and competing, and that competition is good for bringing out your prey drive. And he even uses it to the extent that, like, you could compete against someone that doesn't know you're competing with them. And so he brought up the example where he was going, it might've been, it doesn't matter, but he was going to speak at a conference, and Tim Tebow was there. Tim Tebow was like the headliner, right? And he said, Tim doesn't know it, but my goal is for everybody to show up for Tim and instead to get me. So their takeaway is, like, I came for Tim. I bought a ticket because I knew Tim Tebow was going to be there. But when they leave, they're like, dang, dude, this guy was the one that hit me. Like, that was the one that was impactful, right? And so it's like, it's nothing against Tim. Nope. It's just a competitiveness that is, like, getting riled up to where, like, I'm going to bring my best. And I don't know. I like thinking of it as intensity, because I think there's a lack of some of that in our culture right now, where I think, whether you want to call it masculine or whatever, like, I think intensity is a good thing at the right time in the right places. I think there's a lack of that sometimes. And I think that carries over into sports, like we're talking about with our kids. Like, I think them learning when is a time to be intense and when's a time not to be intense. So, like, with my boys, and we focus a ton on this kind of stuff because I've got 4 boys, right? So I'm like, masculine, all this stuff. Like this is a relevant topic in our household and is going to be for the next 20 years. Like I need to educate myself on this. So, we read stuff and watch content around like with Jordan Peterson and stuff like this. And I'm part of a group. One of the guys that started the group's name is Jeremy Pryor. And he wrote a book. I think it's called The Father's Compass. And in it, he talks about this idea, and we've kind of adopted it a little bit, but it's the idea of a sheathed sword. And so you got a sword that is sharp, but it's going to stay in the sheath. And so like can't do any damage there. And so my sons, and this is kind of in the same line as like Jordan Peterson, it's like, I want my sons to be dangerous. I want them to have a sharp sword. So all my boys do jujitsu. Like I want them to be dangerous, to carry themselves that way. But more than that, I want to teach them the discipline or the self-control to be able to keep the sword in the sheath and to know when to pull it out. Yep. And so we have a good friend that's she was in the UFC for 4 years, and her husband were just out here visiting. And one of my boys had an interaction at school with an older kid. And so we were talking about the sheath sword, and my friend, her name's Miranda. And I told my boys, I said, she's got a sharp sword, like one of the sharpest. Mm-hmm. But what she has even more than that is the discipline to know to keep it in the sheath. Yep. And when to pull it out, right? Because you've got somebody like, regardless of who you are, if you're in the UFC, like you're probably one of the most dangerous people in the world.
Yep.
But you have an incredible discipline to know when to pull it out and when to keep it in the sheath. And so I think that ties into that like level of intensity. My boys got in a fight at school last year, and I told, like, afterwards we were debriefing, and their brothers are great apart. I'm like, look, and I don't know this is right either, but I'm like, look, if your brother commits, you're all in.
Yep.
And now for your brother, you got to realize that if you make a decision to commit, you're roping him in also. Yep. And so you making this decision is not just obligating you, but it's also obligating him.
Yep.
And so it carries even more weight. And the second part of it was like, we don't dabble. This isn't like 0 to 10. We're not like revving up. It's like 0 to 100 or nothing at all.
Nope.
And it's just that idea of like the sword is either in the sheath or it's out of the sheath. And so I know we're way off topic, but that's kind of how we look at it, is like intensity. And I think that competitiveness is good. I think there's a time and a place. And so you got to know when.
It's a great way to put it. Yep. Well, yeah, there are times when, you got to know when to use it, when to bring it out. You got to have a switch in a way, right? Like, mm-hmm. I mean, I still play basketball on Mondays. In fact, I'm playing tonight, and there are times where I know I can only take it to a certain level, to where if I'm being too competitive and probably too much intensity, where my game drops off, right? Mm-hmm. I know there's a sweet spot where I've got to be there's got to be a switch. I got to switch it on, but I can't go over that switch, that intensity marker. So
yeah, I was a wrestler growing up, and that was that was the phrase we used, was like to flip the switch, right? Because like you've got 6 minutes where you are all out.
Yep.
And I did a lot of like competitive CrossFit when I was getting out of college, and I was real good. I'm like the prototypical like body type, not anymore. I'm probably 15 pounds too heavy, but back then I was. And I've tried going back to it, and I can't mentally get myself to throttle the intensity back to not hurt myself.
Yep.
Because back then, like, I was young and healthy and would heal overnight.
Yep.
And it was the mind game of like, okay, I'm going to wait until this guy drops, and then I'm going to do 2 more. And then I'm going to make sure that I start before he starts again, because mentally that's going to bury him. Yep. Right. So there's like a competitive intensity there. And now I'm just like, frick, dude, I just don't want my knees to hurt tomorrow. Like,
no.
It's just different.
It is different. And that's kind of my thought process of basketball. I'm like, and every week I'm like, I'm just running 3-point line to 3-point line. And guess what? 10 minutes into it, I'm not doing that. And I try to remind myself too. It's like, I'm 42. Like, I can't be.
Are you really? I didn't realize.
Yeah, man, 42. I'm 42. So it's trying to still play basketball. I have to go into that, and I have to keep that thought, because it's like, I want to be able to walk tomorrow, or at least be able to get out of bed on my own. Anyways, yeah, we're off topic, but this has been awesome, man. This has been absolutely awesome. Could probably
We got
talk
off
another
topic
3 hours.
because you weren't in Seattle a couple months ago, so we missed each other. So
I know
this is a little bit of overdue catch up.
Catching up. I know it, man.
I'll
Yeah,
see you in a
maybe we
couple
can
weeks.
convince you to come back on.
Heck yeah.
But yeah, we'll wrap this up. Where if anyone wants to reach out to you, questions with your consulting or anything else, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge social media guy. I'm working on it, trying to get better. But the revopscoach, the revopscoach, Ian Bishop on Instagram or LinkedIn. And then same website, the revopscoach.com. Or if you're interested in the Ops Academy, myopsacademy.com is where you would go for like getting support for your operator or building out that accelerator. Sorry, not accelerator. Building out the playbook. We call it the accelerator. So your Ops Academy accelerator is to build out the playbook for your business. And then that parlays into Ops Academy, which is the support for your operator.
Awesome.
We do a leadership development call each month. And I usually open up some free spots for that. So if you've got an operator that you feel like could benefit from like personal development, leadership development, shoot me a message somewhere on one of those platforms or whatever with your operator's name, email address. And if you got listeners that would benefit, I'd put them in there. If they're real estate guys, I have a real estate cohort called REI Boss. So it's REI Business Operating Systems. And it's specifically designed for real estate investors that need help building out the operating systems in the real estate business. So it's a little more niched and catered to them.
Got it. Awesome. Well, we'll put this in the show notes too, website and where to find you. Man, This has been awesome. Appreciate you coming on, sharing so much. I'll probably have to go back. I don't listen to episodes, but I'll probably have to go back and listen to this. It's been awesome, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for following, subscribing, and listening to this episode of the Do More podcast hosted by John Farling. To learn more or ask questions, go to l4investing.com.